You have Trump coming in. He promised 10, 20% tariff. So you have a couple of months where people wondering, will he, won't he? And then he has this announcement. In April, we're going to do this reciprocal tariffs. And so people do these calculations. What might that be? What might that look like? Then April comes around and he announces we're going to do these tariffs that we basically calculated on a napkin
Yeah.
and that no one predicted. And then a month later, he walks it back. And now we're actually a situation where the EU will face not 10 or 20, but 50%. So if you're an exporter, that's a nightmare. It makes it impossible to make any investment decisions at all.
The reignition of trade tensions between the US and the EU. Donald Trump has threatened to put a 50% tariff on all goods sent to America from the bloc, from the European Union. In a post on his Truth Social platform, the US president said discussions with Brussels were going nowhere. And those comments came just hours before Brussels and Washington were due to have talks to negotiate on tariffs already in place. So could this have a knock-on effect here in the UK? Let's speak to Aslak Berg, a research fellow at the Centre for European Reform. Aslak, welcome back to the programme.
Thank you, and good evening, Henry.
Good evening to you. How seriously do you think European leaders will take this latest attack from Donald Trump? He sounds very serious, but what do you think they will read into it?
They will have to take it seriously. There's no, we've seen in the past how he imposed tariffs on China, how he imposed tariffs on other countries. So they take it seriously, but I don't think it will make them budge because they've also seen that he walked back tariffs on China a little. There is domestic pressures in the US. The US corporate sector do not like these tariffs at all. The estimate is that these tariffs would cost, the EU 0.5% of GDP, but for the US it would be closer to 1.5%. So the US would actually be hurt more.
So the US is in a weaker position, Aslak. Go on.
Yeah, they're not in a weaker position, but they're dealing with an equal in the EU.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that Trump doesn't like the EU, because he prefers to deal with countries that are weaker than him.
Yeah. Like us, like the UK, we've had our sort of a trade deal. And when you consider that the sticking points in a full trade deal might be the legendary chlorine-washed chicken and the hormone-treated beef. But what are the red lines in a possible trade relationship between the US and the EU? What are the sticking points?
The sticking point is that the EU does not want to do what the UK did. What the UK did was to essentially acquiesce. They agreed to these new tariffs that the US has, 10%, and then 25% on all those beyond a certain quota.
Yep.
That is not acceptable to the EU, and that makes it much harder. For the EU, this is about protecting the legal order, the sort of stability that the global economy needs. If you're going to make investment decisions, you need to have some kind of predictability. You need to know what kind of condition you'll face, not just this month, but also 1, 2, 5, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And that is why these tariffs are so detrimental.
Yeah. And not so long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, Trump claimed he had 200 trade deals lined up, ready to go. But in the interim, only one has been signed, and that's with us, with the UK. So where do you see this going, and what might the impact be on potential US negotiations with the likes of China, Japan, India, et al.?
Well, it does not bode well for China or for India or Japan or any of these countries that are not willing to accept the terms that the UK did. The UK accepted those terms in part because I think the government wanted a victory, and also because the UK is just more reliant on services than manufacturing. And if you're reliant on manufacturing, that makes it much harder to accept tariffs on goods. Services obviously don't face tariffs. I think the problem now is we've already had a year of uncertainty. It started even during the elections. And then you have the election, you have Trump coming in. He promised 10, 20% tariff. So you have a couple of months where people wondering, will he, won't he? And then he has this announcement. In April, we're going to do this reciprocal tariffs. And so people do these calculations. What might that be? What might that look like? Then April comes around and he announces we're going to do these tariffs that we basically calculated on a napkin
Yeah.
and that no one predicted. And then a month later, he walks it back. And now we're actually a situation where the EU will face not 10 or 20, but 50%. So if you're an exporter, that's a nightmare. It makes it impossible to make any investment decisions at all.
And the question is, briefly, Aslak, what happens between now and the 1st of June? That's not long ago. It's not long away, is it?
Yeah, I mean, they will try to make a deal. The EU will make a concerted offers, but they will try to make a deal without conceding on principle. And I think that will be very, very difficult. So I think I think it's very plausible that these tariffs will come into place, at least for a short time.
Yeah.
And that the EU, if that happens, the EU will also respond very quickly.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much to you, Aslak. We're going to have to finish there, but thank you very much. Really good to get the benefit of your expertise, Aslak Berg, who is a research fellow at the Centre for European Reform.
I just said it's time that we play the game the way I know how to play the game.
U.S. President Donald Trump told reporters Friday that a threatened 50% tariff on EU goods beginning June 1st could be delayed if European companies start moving to the United States.
I'm not looking for a deal. I mean, we've set the deal. It's at 50%. But again, there is no tariff if they build their plant here. Now, if somebody comes in and wants to build a plant here, I can talk to them about a little bit of a delay.
Trump's broadside was first delivered in a Truth Social post where he said trade talks with the EU, quote, are going nowhere. Washington is demanding unilateral concessions from Brussels to open up to U.S. business, while the EU seeks an agreement in which both sides could gain, according to people familiar with the talks.
I don't think there is anything set in stone.
Polish Trade Minister Michał Baranowski told reporters on Friday that Trump's latest tariff threat on EU goods is just another step in their ongoing trade negotiations. The EU trade chief said the European Commission was fully committed to securing a deal that worked for both sides, following a Friday phone call with his U.S. counterpart. He added that trade must be guided by mutual respect, not threats.
I think there's significant uncertainty.
Guntram Wolf is a senior fellow at Bruegel, a Brussels-based economic think tank.
I think the European Union cannot cave in and should not try to appease Donald Trump at this point. The experience of the last couple of months is that this US president actually blinks. I mean, he actually gives in when faced with the major negative consequences of his actions. And so I think it's important to document and show that this is actually going to be very harmful for the US economy as well as for the European economy.
Trump on Friday also took aim at Apple, warning he may slap a 25% levy on all iPhones bought by U.S. consumers.
We're talking about the iPhone now, and, you know, the iPhone, if they're going to sell it in America, I want it to be built in the United States.
The President of the United States can do a lot of things.
Gil Luria, head of technology research at D.A. Davidson, says Apple needs to negotiate with the president in good faith.
Right now, it would be considerably more expensive to make an iPhone in the US. Having said that, in the longer time frame, in the 5-year and beyond time frame, that does not need to be the case. Very little of the cost of the phone has to do with the assembly labor. A lot more of it has to do with the facilities, the technology around the manufacturing, and the skill set in designing the production of the handsets. That is what we've outsourced to China, Taiwan, and elsewhere, and that is what is doable to bring in the longer time frame.
Trump said other smartphone makers like Samsung would also face a 25% tariff.